Hey, g'day, it's Prezzo here. Welcome back to the shop. Today's video is about machining a brass casting for a machinist hammer. And we're going to run through the process to turn it from this rough casting into this finished hammer head, complete with the powder coating and the monogram. So I've done 5 of these hammer heads as rough castings. You can sort of always tell that somebody's worked out all the bugs in the process by showing you the finished one when they start. And it's not as straightforward as you might think. So let's get busy. Let's turn this into a finished brass hammerhead. First step in this process is just the fettling. Now, fettling is just cleaning up the casting, removing any of the parting line where you get sort of excess metal. I've already done a bit of this, and it's just done with a round file. These areas in here were the worst. The only reason I'm doing this is so that when we get to the next stage, which is setting up this part in the lathe, it's got to be gripped in here by the 4-jaw chuck, and the parting line flashing was interfering with that. So this will be improved later on. And this area here is where it was connected to the runner in the mould, in the sand mould. That's been cut off with the hacksaw, and I've just given that a light clean up on the linisher as well. That's all going to be faced on the lathe at the next step. I'm just setting up the casting in a 4-jaw chuck, and I've got some copper jaw protectors on this just because it's soft and resilient. It'll take up any sort of misalignment in the casting. And what we're going to do is get this to run reasonably true, just using the tool to indicate that surface. Alright, I know that you should probably use something better, but this is a rough casting. So we're not going to get this, or we can't use an indicator on such a rough cast surface. It just won't work. So this is all about just using the tool and sighting down on top of it and getting it as close as we can. So where you have the run out, you just adjust the chuck jaws. That's pretty close. Pretty good. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now, we're going to machine the face of the hammer here, just face it straight off. This outer surface here, I know from my pattern making, this has a 2.5 degree taper, or a 5 degree included angle. I've set my top slide to 2.5 degrees so we can machine straight along that face there using the compound until that's cleaned up. Okay, that's pretty good. That's cleaned up that outer surface there. I could do with another pass across the face here. There is a little tiny defect at the very center of the hammer face. Now, I'm finding this on just about every one of the castings that I've done, and it's a result of me not forming the gate correctly into the mold cavity. What happens is you get a tiny little bit of localized shrinkage just at the sharp edge where the gate enters the cavity. I did get some advice after the fact that I should have tapered off the runner going into the mold cavity in both the cope and the drag. I only did it in the drag, and that resulting sharp edge is causing that little localized shrinkage. Functionally, doesn't matter, the hammer's still going to work. It's just it's a bit frustrating. That's the perfectionist in me coming out. I don't know if you can see it, I'll show you closer shortly, but there's still a defect there. And I'm using a long angle lathe file for doing this filing in the lathe. These are great, they tend to give you a much better finish than a cross-cut file. And I'll just hit this with some Scotch-Brite to finish it off. Just having a close look, I reckon that defect's fairly shallow. I'm going to give that one more pass and I'll clean up that face completely, I hope. No, it's mocking me. It's still there. It must be like it's just fine porosity that goes back into the hammer face. Gonna have to live with it. So you can see it there. It's obviously goes fairly deep into the face of the hammer. Yep, frustrating, annoying, but it's still going to work as a hammer. So at the other end here, we're just doing a similar process, just getting this running reasonably true. So I can clean up the ball peen end. Okay, it's pretty close. Of course, it's not truly circular either. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is I'll just machine the biggest diameter and then we'll do the rest with the file. There's the ball end, hammer face and the outer surface there. I'm not going to go crazy polishing this up. You've got to remember it's a functional tool, not a decorative piece. It's going to get all scarred and knocked around anyway in use. So that's looking presentable. Now that machining's out of the way, the next step is to get these upper and lower surfaces around the hammer handle hole cleaned up and, you know, filed. But there's no need to go overboard with this. We're not making a door knocker or a doorknob. It's a functional tool. If you have a look at a forged hammer head, there's always going to be imperfections around where the dies close or the forging process happens. Where is Clickspring when you need him? So that's about as good as that needs to be. I'll clean it up with some emery and Scotch-Brite and so on. It's worth doing this before you pay attention to these faces here. This requires a lot of moving around in the vise and so on. If you get all this cleaned up and then grip it in the vise, it's going to get scratched and marked. So that's basically the last thing we do. Okay, with that cleaned up to that stage, I'm going to use a Scotch-Brite wheel to try and buff out the worst of the file marks, and then I'll use a Cratex point in a Dremel to do the rest. That's about as far as I can get with that, It sort of blends in the worst of the file marks and just gives it a sort of uniform texture. These Cratex points don't last forever. These dark green ones are the coarsest of the 4 grits that you get in a box. But they're good for this sort of work. I think I'm going to stop there just with the Scotch-Brite finish. I'm not going to get a mirror finish on this, and there's no need anyway. It's too complex a part, there's too many undercuts. It's a casting, and you're always going to get defects in a casting. And after all, it's a bloody hammer, not a gold play button, is it? So that's it, I'm stopping there. Next thing I need to do here is to powder coat inside that monogram. So we're going to do that. Then we can clean up that face, and that will remove all the excess powder coat and just leave behind the lettering picked out in whatever colour we choose to use. The only important bit of prep for this powder coat is just to make sure the metal is free of any grease or oil. I'm just using some alcohol to clean this out, just to make sure there's no brass powder or debris in there or sand. And because it's protected down inside that detail, it doesn't need to be as thorough as you would do on a sort of a surface that's going to get a lot of abrasion. That's pretty much it. What we'll do next is just mask off as much of this area as we can, just to reduce the amount of cleanup we need to do. I find that alfoil or aluminium foil is good for this. It sort of conforms to that shape, and it's easy to get off. It's not like masking tape. You can also put it in the oven with that foil on, and heat resistant. If you use masking tape, it sort of gets baked on. It's really hard to remove. You can use Kapton tape. There are other types of heat resistant tapes that you can get. Okay, that's good enough. This is the powder coat setup that I use at home here. This the Eastwood product. It's called DIY powder coating system. Only trouble is it's 110 volt, so I've got to have a transformer to make this work on our 240 volt shop power. This is the powder that I'm using today. It's a super wet black powder coat. It dries glossy. It's durable and hard and easy to put on. That's what we're using. I've got a wire hanging here from the ceiling of the shed, and earth wire from the powder coat unit goes on to that, and we can hang our part directly onto that wire, which is convenient. Alright, so what we need to do now is just put the powder in the monogram there. Now, because it's electrostatic, it'll get attracted to all of the metal, and the best we can do is try to keep it just in that one spot, but it will sweep around and cover other areas as well, which is why we use the foil masking. Just want to make sure we get a good thick coating in there. The thing about powder coat is that it looks like it's really painted on, but it's not. It's just held there by the electrostatic charge. So if you were to brush that or blow it with air, all that powder will come off very easily. So we've got to be a little bit careful now when we remove the foil and clean up the rest of the brass before we bake it. This one's already been done, and that's sort of the stage we want to get it to. So it's going to take the foil off. And we're going to use just a soft paintbrush to remove most of the powder. So this is all about just selectively removing the powder we don't want and leaving it in the detail area. The trouble with this stuff is it has a residual electrostatic charge and it doesn't sort of want to let go easily. So you just got to be patient and just check. So it's starting to look pretty good. For the last little bit you can use just a bit of cotton wool and some water, and that'll just sort of pick up any of the stubborn bits. If there is any powder left in areas where you don't want it, it's going to be very thin. It'll come off fairly easily with steel wool or Scotch-Brite or something like that. Okay, that one's pretty much done. Just rinse and repeat now, get them all to that stage. Okay, they'll go in the oven now, 200 degrees C. The baking time is about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes when the powder starts to flow and goes glossy. The big chunks of brass could take about 20 minutes to come up to temperature. Then we bake it for 15, let it cool down, and it's done. Well, that's done with the coarse belt. I'm just going to finish off with a fine now, and that'll take care of the last little bit of a line around the edge where that disc went in with the monogram. Well, it's got to wash out the brass powder from inside that relief there and just deburr these sharp edges, or at least put a radius on anyway. Probably need to get that sort of sanded with some emery just around that edge there. It's still got a few little burrs. Well, it just sort of softens that around that edge there. Once again, it's a hammer, not a piece of jewellery, so I'm not going to go crazy, but it just feels nice. Okay, this is the most important part of this whole process, I guess, and that's getting the handle secured into the hammer head. And what we have to do here is to get the top section of the handle to spread outwards to completely fill the cavity on the top of the hammer head. And then it should also seat firmly on this tapered section here. So what you end up with when the handle is completely fitted is a double taper. So it can't move down the handle and the head can't move off the end of the handle either. So the way I do this, I fit the head temporarily and just give it a tap on the bench and seat it down on this tapered section here, and then remove it again and look for the bruising. So I'm just going to give this a tap on the bench. Now we remove the handle. And now we're going to look carefully and see if we can find that bruising. So there's a bit there. If I turn that around, you can see it quite clearly there. So it's only seating on these outer edges on the largest diameter here. So we're going to remove a bit of wood from those sections and try it again. So I'm just using a half round rasp. try that again. This time the handle fits a bit further up. You can see there's more of the handle protruding. So remove that again. This time it's not quite so clear, but it's still bruising down here. So we're just going to keep trying that, and it's a case of looking carefully to see where it's touching. Now, if we look underneath, you can see there's a gap just here. Seems to be fairly tight all the way around. So we're getting close. Now if I just keep whacking that on the bench, we'll eventually deform the timber and it'll fit nonetheless. But you try and get it as close as you can by carefully using the rasp. Okay, I think we're pretty good around there now. And you can see how much of the handle is protruding from the top of the hammer, and you can see how much of a gap there is at the top. So we've got to spread all of that wood out to try and fill the gaps on either side. So that means wedging that apart. It's pretty tight lengthways, it's just sort of crossways where we've got to get it to spread. Alright, so that's where we want our saw cut to stop, or actually just slightly before that. Now, in order to stop that split from propagating and going further down into this part of the handle here, I'm going to cut or drill a relief hole first on the drill press next door. Be back in a minute. So there's a 3.5mm drilled hole just above that pencil mark, and now I'm going to get the bandsaw and cut down to that hole to make the split for the wedge. Okay, well that's where our wedge is going to go. Alright, okay, there's our wedge that's made of hardwood, and it's just a process of trial and error. I cut a whole stack of these and I just try them, trying to find one that will spread the top of the handle enough to, mostly close the gap around the edge, but not bottom out into that relief hole. And I've done a trial fit with this one. We'll just do it again, and then if we're happy with it, we'll hammer it down as far as it'll go. Alright, so let's just give that a tap. And you want to sort of just check it, make sure that nothing appears to be splitting. You should check around the edges here and see if it's filling up the space on the side there. That seems to be okay. At this stage it can still come out, but now we're going to put that in for good, I hope. Alright, that all seems good. So what we need to do now is cut off the excess, and then we need to put a second wedge in, a steel wedge, which hopefully will lock everything in permanently, and then we'll clean it up on top. Well, let's see if I can do this without getting in your way. Okay, we can give that a final clean up and we've got the steel wedge in there. Okay, this is our steel wedge. Now, I actually made this on the mill. I tried to buy some and couldn't get them at short notice, couldn't get them in this size either. So it's like a Christmas tree arrangement with a sharp edge at the top. That'll go into the end of the handle, and it just does the last of the locking process. It'll expand the wood, and we're going to put it in crossways to the other wedge, sort of like that. So wish me luck, this could all go badly wrong, especially if this wedge is a bit flimsy. I found in practice that they don't like going in. Yep, thought that might happen. There you go, back to the drawing board, Mark. This one was a bit too thin, but that's alright, I've got plenty of steel, I'll make another one. Okay, here we go, take two. Typically, the one I did off camera worked fine, but let's try this one. That's working. Okay, that's sort of not going to go any further. That's gone down past the first barb, and once it does that, the wood compresses around it again, and hopefully it won't come out. I'll get this cleaned up and we'll check it, see what it looks like. Okay, I'm going to have to stop there. I don't want to go much further with the fire. I was already scuffing the edge of the brass there. So I'll finish that off with some emery or glass paper. And I think we're nearly done. Well, there you go. There's 4 brass hammers finished. And I had a bit of an issue with 2 of them. Let's see, this one, I couldn't put the steel wedge in there, it was just too tight, so I just left it with the hardwood wedge down the centre of the handle. I don't think that's going to come apart. And I think I had the same issue with this one. You can see where I started trying to put the steel wedge in and it was just popping out, and I just worried that I was going to bend it over part way in, so I put a little bit of hardwood in there, and that seems to have firmed up the head of that handle. It's all good. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, come on Mark, you said you're making 5 handles and 5 hammerheads and you kept showing us 5. So what's the story? Well, it's a sad story, I can tell you that. Wait till I show you. So this is the one that I made for my friend Macca, and sadly this one had the best handle. I did this one by laser etching through some masking tape, and then I backfilled the edge area with an ebony wood filler. So that's completely flush, but it looks dead black against the handle. Some of these other ones, you know, not quite so easy to see the text on the grain of the timber. However, that's not really the sad story. I was driving in the hardwood wedge, everything was going well, and all of a sudden there was a crack. Now, check that out. Don't know if you can see that, but there's a fracture line running right down through the head and underneath to the underside of the handle. Now, when I was taking this out of the sand mould, it looked a bit dodgy. There was some evidence of a sort of a crease along where that's cracked, and I believe what has happened is the metal flowed in this end through what would be the face of the hammerhead, and it's flowed around the core in both directions, and then it met up again at the back. And there's a technical term for this, not sure what it is. In my case, it's just poor craftsmanship. But the metal didn't really come around there and rejoin as liquid metal. It's sort of cooled and then it's joined up again, but it's not one single contiguous piece of brass through there. And just the wedging action there has fractured that through. So, what do you do?
Breaking news.
Okay, well here is the breaking news. I posted a picture of the fractured hammerhead on Instagram, and John Creasy got in touch and he said, just silver solder it together again. And the pragmatic part of my brain said, you know what, let's do it. And let's face it, you do the same. Of course you would. Looking at that closely, I can't see where the silver solder is. It's got a slightly whiter colour than the brass, and these hammers are not designed for heavy blows, so if it's just used for what it was designed for, it'll be fine. Anyway, I'm going down to my mate Macca tomorrow. We're going to drink a few beers. I'll make sure he's had plenty before I give him this, and hopefully he will not look too closely. So I'm going to finish up here now. Thanks for watching. On the next video, what am I doing on the next one? Oh, I know, we're doing the disco sign for the workshop. So a bit of electronics, a bit of wood and metal work. Should be cool. I'm going to send one of these to my mentor, old foundryman. This is for my friend Rick up at Gympie. This one's mine. This is for my son. It's going to Wellington in New Zealand. So there you go. We're all done. Thanks for watching. Catch you on the next video.